Welcome to B2B Commerce Corner. Commerce Corner is a sub-series of the ECOMMERCE EDGE podcast discussing all things B2B commerce through the lens of agencies, consultants, merchants, and more. Enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the ECOMMERCE EDGE podcast. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome my amazing next guest, and it's someone that I've actually talked about having on the podcast multiple times before, and actually we've discussed having you on the podcast before. We never made it happen until now. Mr. Aaron Sheehan from Oro, welcome to the pod.
Thank you. It is a delight and an honor to be here.
Yeah, and we managed to be able to do almost like a little bit of a pod swap here. I was recently on the Oro podcast. I don't think that episode's dropped just yet.
Not yet.
And we said, look, let's just schedule you being on my podcast. After we finished the recording, we were like, let's just get you scheduled into my podcast immediately. Otherwise, if we don't do it, it'll never happen. So let's just make it happen.
That's right. Podcast swapping. It's the new trend.
It is the new trend. Look, I'm looking forward to having a deep and meaningful with you today about all things digital commerce, specifically B2B digital commerce, because that's an area you and I have really doubled and tripled down on over the last few years. And I'd love to understand a little bit more about that. You came on to my radar. I think we connected originally back in 2021, late 2021, I think-ish. And obviously in early 2022, you started out at BC. But let's take a walk down Aaron's memory lane here. And even before we get into kind of the traditional e-com space that you eventually ended up in, I want to hear more about being a Navy intelligence analyst and crypto logic technician. You were that for almost 5 years. I want to learn more about that because I have a sneaking suspicion that kind of in a flywheel sort of way led to everything that came after.
Oh, that's really interesting. And I can tell you've been looking at my LinkedIn because it's not a topic I bring up a lot because it's not usually germane to the topic of B2B e-commerce, but I love dot connecting. So by all means, let's go through this exercise together.
Yeah. So tell me all about it. Tell me how you decided to go into the Navy. I mean, from Barnes & Noble to the U.S. Navy.
Right.
And then also how you picked, does the Navy, because I've never been in the U.S. military before, do they tell you where to go, or can you like nominate, okay, I want to work in maybe one of these 3 areas, and cool, we're going to put you in one of those 3 areas?
Yeah, closer to the latter. So I guess the history of that for me is, so I grew up in retail as a kid, literally as a kid, as child labor for my dad. And
as many of us did. I worked in my father's family company and when I was very young.
Yep, exactly. It's a great way to start. And you meet people, you learn about customer service, you learn about all the boring stuff that goes on behind the scenes, you learn how businesses run. When I turned 16, I turned 16, I got a real job working for Barnes & Noble. Worked my way up the sort of retail management ladder there. I was living in Florida at the time when 9/11 happened. And like a lot of guys my age, felt like I should go do something rather than just retail. And so there was a kind of a long enlistment period there. They were quite busy processing all of the people who were suddenly signing up. But I ended up going off to boot camp in January of 2003, which was in Chicago. And going from Florida winter to Chicago winter was a big shift, let me tell you.
Yes.
Now, when you get to the Navy, you absolutely, so to answer your question, how do you decide what job you're going to get? Everybody takes a test. The Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, or ASVAB. And it's honestly, it's a do you eat crayons level of, it's not a hard test, like, right?
Yes.
But they basically offered me 2 choices based on my test scores. They said, you can go into the nuclear program or you can go be a cryptologist. And I was like, but the nuclear program required a very long period of intense schooling and also a lot of maths, which not necessarily my favorite topic, believe it or not. And so I was like, what's this other thing? And the recruiter could not tell me. I don't know what you're going to do. I think they said James Bond shit is what they said. I was like, sign me up, right?
You're like,
I know
okay,
you're
man, I'm in.
I know you're lying, but it sounds great. So let's do it. And so that's what everybody goes to basic training. And then once you get out of that, you go to what's called A school, which is like where you go to learn your job. As it happened, the A school for cryptology was back in Florida. And I was like, yes, I would love to go back to Florida. That sounds amazing. I've just spent 3 months off the coast of the Great Lakes and Chicago in the winter, freezing my ass off, and very much to go back to Florida. So I did that. And then you get out of that, and then they say, where do you want to go? You have this wonderful, what duty station do you want to be posted to? And you make a wish list, and then they ignore it and they send you where they want you to go. And I got sent somewhere that I wasn't on my list, but that was okay. It was fine.
Wow. Wow. And I know as an intelligence analyst, you might not be able to get into all the gory details of what you did for national security reasons. However, cryptography, code breaking, all that sort of stuff seems like it would fall under that cryptologics. I think it would fall under that purview. So effectively a naval spy, for lack of a better term.
No, really, honestly, to be real honest, I spent most of my time on ships. I was deployed the majority of my time with a team of like-minded, skilled people sitting in a windowless space with a lot of locks on the doors and a lot of computers, and you're locked in there for 12 hours a day, and then they let you out and you go do other stuff, and then you go back in and you repeat that for months and months. And that was how I spent a lot of 5 years. There was a brief period of time where I was in instructor duty after my first couple of deployments. They were like, because one of the things that the Navy did then anyway was immersive simulation training. And so you'd be building scenarios and stuff like that, some of which are startlingly relevant to recent world events. And you're basically bringing in another group of people and you're saying, hey, we're going to put you in this immersive simulator and we're going to be throwing stuff at you. There's full computer simulation and everything, and voice and radio, and we're acting as the opposition forces, and you've got to react and then give us briefings on what you've discovered and all the rest of that. So that was a fun little way to spend, I think, about 8 or 9 months of doing that, teaching classes and stuff like that, because they wanted to get people who would just come back off the boat. They're like, hey, if you've been in theater deployed, why don't you come back and train the next group that's about to go right back out? But yeah, it was a lot of fun. It sounds, I promise you, like with everything that the military does, it sounds much more interesting and exciting than living it actually is, which is long periods of not doing very much, followed by short bursts of being very busy. And then you go back to not doing very much for a long period of time.
So I guess what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz right now is of extreme interest to you, and you're keeping your eye on it.
Oh, yeah. I spent a lot of time in the Strait of Hormuz and around it. Yeah, paying close attention.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And let's talk about after you got out, you were like, what do I want to do now? And you were like, where is there this confluence of things I know how to do or can learn how to do very easily, combined with what can make me a good living?
That's exactly right.
And so you're like, okay, what do I do next? It's probably something technical of some description. It's probably something to do with commerce of some description. Then you went to be a product manager at Brightcore.
It's funny because there was what I went to college for. When I got out, I went to school. We have what's called the GI Bill, which is like a college scholarship program for veterans. And so I got out, I went to college, I got my degree in geosciences, and I was planning to spend my time in the field doing data collection and doing mapping. I've always liked maps. I've always liked data. I've always liked analysis. And so I was in this GIS field. It was like a confluence of data and mapping. It's just I would be doing it for what you might call civilian agencies or civilian companies instead of for the military.
And sorry to interrupt. So this might be for an oil and gas company, for example.
Very common, yes. Yep, exactly. A lot of different use cases for that. Unfortunately, I happened to graduate right in the middle of one of the biggest recessions that we've had in my lifetime in 2010, right? 2008, the market collapses. 2010 wasn't really any better, to be honest. And the people who were hiring for people like me with my background were all in budget freezes. And so there was nothing to do. So I had to go do honest work. And I literally just, a friend of a friend was COO of a startup making software for the insurance business. And they needed someone to come in as an analyst and help take very complicated insurance property casualty rules for how rates are generated and basically enter them and apply them into a computer engine to be used for computer-based rating. And so it was very much digital transformation, Chase. So that's the thing. And that's what's kicked it off at the very beginning is I was taking stuff that was in binders that of paper that had been photocopied multiple times for literally decades. In some cases. So just like old handwritten stuff that was photocopied, put in a binder. Somebody took a picture or scanned it, put it in another binder. And these companies were in some cases over 100 years old. And they're like, the internet, what's that? I don't know about the internet. What is it? You've got a largely a very aging workforce, people who are retiring out of it. It's insurance business, right? It's very conservative, very capital strapped. Believe it or not, people think of insurance companies as very wealthy. There's a lot of cash, but it's not accessible for various regulatory rules. And so these companies operate on a pretty thin thin margin. And so digital transformation is usually a tricky subject. And you couple that with the obvious footprint for digital transformation being replacing the laborious work that someone is doing. You can imagine the conversations that I got to be part of and doing that job. So my friend recruits me and says, hey, come be an analyst over here. And pretty quickly what I had to do was I was picking up the phone and calling our customers and trying to clarify, like, what does this mean? Or if you did it like this, it would actually be easier. And now I'm negotiating. Now I'm this agent of change. And that very quickly turned into a full-time job as the head of product, basically for this startup. I knew nothing about insurance. I knew very little about technology, but it was a startup. Nobody knew anything about anything. That's why it's a startup. And that company's still going today, actually. But so I did that for several years. That was quite an introduction to technology, learning on the fly, basically drinking from a fire hose every single day, leading a team. And then ultimately that got me into tech. That was my springboard job from totally not being in the tech world to like, oh my God, it's 2010. Technology is the hottest thing on earth right now. And the great thing about the IT industry and technology in general, Jason, is that it's not overly credentialed. So it's a field where what you know and your abilities and how you apply them will take you much further than any piece of paper from another institution. And that's important to me because my piece of paper was apparently worthless at that time. And so I needed a field where no one was gatekeeping quite so rigorously as they are in other places. And I fell in love with technology and have been there ever since. That was 15 years ago.
Two takeaways from this. One is tech tends to be more of a meritocracy. I would 100% agree with that. I didn't go to university. I didn't get a degree. I came out of high school, went straight into the workforce. First industry I ever worked in was hospitality, and thought I learned a lot of amazing soft skills through that whole experience, and then started to turn my talents towards tech, mainly because I was enamored and so confused but excited about this thing called the internet. Now, I think you're a little bit younger than me, but I distinctly remember the world going through this period of no internet, coming of the internet, the mainstreaming of the internet, and now the mainlining of the internet.
Oh,
And
100%.
and I was like, wow, okay, this even before ecom became a really big thing, I could tell already. I remember the WAP browser from Nokia. I just remember every seemingly little tiny advancement that happened in our industry. And I saw it stacking on top of each other. I remember the bulletin board days. I remember the ICQ days. I just remember every little thing. I could see this giant set of puzzle pieces slowly starting to morph together into something that I didn't know exactly how it would turn out, but I knew it would change our lives forever. And I knew it would change my generation's lives primarily, like in the most dramatic way, because we went from a hyper local world where my dad's business, and he was servicing in the early days, he was servicing and selling typewriters, the IBM Selectrics. And then he eventually had a computer store, a retail computer store. But his retail computer store was selling business computers, because even he knew back then, okay, I'm going to make a lot more money selling computers to businesses than to individuals, where retailers are going to largely own that business eventually. We were selling Eagle computers into business situations. And so I saw that writing on the wall from a really early point. And at what point did you realize in your career, okay, this changes everything forever, this whole thing called the interwebs?
Oh man, that's a really good question. Like you, I'm old enough to have remembered this transition. I was in my teens before I was, I think, 16 when the internet dial-up finally came to my hometown. And growing up, obviously, computers were like a sort of a novelty item that the very well off had, but not something that you would. We had game systems. I remember Super
Yes,
Mario and Duck Hunt,
all the
all the rest of it,
consoles and
all the
everything. Yeah.
consoles and everything, but there was no like online interactivity. There was no thought of e-commerce. There was no thought of anything like that at the time. I think for me, the kind of the eureka moment for me was very prosaic. Like when I was 18, I moved out of the house, moved to Florida, and started figuring out what I had to support myself and had to pay the bills and run a household of at least me and occasionally a roommate. And being in a strange town, not knowing a lot of people, the first place I went to go get information was the internet. So this would have been 2001, right? So DSL, like the flaming hot. That was the fastest internet you could possibly get. Like 1.5 megabits per second was like, whoa. And you
Yeah.
didn't bump somebody off the phone when you wanted to like
Yes.
go on Yahoo and look something up. I could pay my utility bills online. Florida's utility company, the state of Florida, FP&L, I think it was. It's been a while. You could pay all your bills. And I remember looking around and realizing there were a lot of things, a lot of like basic, boring adult stuff, buying insurance,
Yes.
things like that, paying taxes that I could do online that I wouldn't have to then go to an office and stand in a line, and you could just do it.
Unfortunately, there was no DMV automation still at that point. So you still had to deal with
No,
the pain of the
still had to
DMV.
do that. That's correct. Oh, that's gotten a little better now, but it's
Yeah.
still not where it ought to be. But I think for me, it was like, oh, my computer has gone from this thing that is an entertainment device to actually, through the power of the internet, being
Useful.
a productive,
Yeah.
useful thing. And the idea that I could put in like an e-check, I could pay by e-check, right, and pay my bills was like, oh, okay, I'm going to make it a point to try to consolidate as many of my adulting things to the computer because it's way more efficient for me to do
Yes.
that than it is to have to go buy stamps, go buy envelopes, go stand in line and all the rest of that. And that for me was like, oh, I need to start taking this seriously. And I started like paying attention to what does digitization look like? What is happening behind the scenes to enable all this amazing stuff to take place? And boy, it just every year more things came online. Like more switches got flipped over the early 2000s and it became a default expectation. What was fascinating about it to me was how quickly digital went from, yeah, there's this thing that'll handle use cases for a small niche of hyper online, basically nerds like me, to being a default expectation for everyone. And to me, what changed that, what really like put gas in that car was when the iPhone came out and when it stopped, because we remember Crackberries and like
Oh,
the
yes.
research in motion
I had a
devices
Pearl.
and yeah, right, of course. But that was a pretty affluent sort of thing to have.
Yes.
But once smartphones, internet connected smartphones came out, suddenly everybody started having this expectation that whatever good or service or experience they wanted was not, I was not doing that in person and then augmenting it with the internet. It was a fully digital experience all the way through.
Yes.
And when it became mass adopted, then we saw responsive, all of a sudden web browsing like standards took off, accessibility standards took off, and expectations. And I think I just turned 44 last week. The thing that has stood out to me is how fast expectations have shifted among people like you and me and as consumers who not that long ago would be astonished to be able to do some of the things that we do online. We would have to make an appointment. We'd have to take off work to go do it, or something would just not be accessible to us, or you'd have to travel 100 miles, 200 miles to go do it. And now everything's online. It's just been a fascinating shift.
It has, and one of the things that I remember that told me, okay, I can actually make a career in this. I think I can build a future in this, was when I started to realize how angry, like literally viscerally angry I got when I couldn't do something online with a business, when I couldn't interact with a business, when maybe they had a brochure website, but they didn't have an email address on their website. They only had a phone number. Or when they didn't have an email address on their website, they only had a form that you could fill out, and
Right.
then it dropped into some ether somewhere, and you didn't know whether you're ever going to hear from them again because they check their emails once a week.
It goes to share it somewhere. And
Exactly. And you might slip through the cracks, and you might have to follow up with a phone call. And I just remember being angry and frustrated and just, wow, okay, this technology, even though I didn't necessarily fully understand the technology at that point, I knew that it was available. And it really frustrated me anytime a business didn't avail themselves of the latest technology to allow people to interact with them in the easiest, most convenient way possible. And I thought to myself, I cannot be the only one. I cannot be the only person that gets angry when a business makes it difficult to do business with them, when a business makes it difficult to communicate with them, when a business makes it difficult to give them money. I thought I must represent a certain strata of society that wants convenience, that wants ease, wants to spend money with businesses that make it easy to spend money with them. And I can't be alone in my thinking. Maybe my parents and my grandparents weren't as thinking that way, and maybe they like the in-person experience more than me. But I remember from almost day dot of the internet thinking, why as a business would you not want to make it as easy as possible for your customers to do business with you and spend money with you? And that was the thread that kind of carried me through to into the industry, starting to understand the industry, starting to question the industry, trying to figure out, okay, what's my place in it? Because I'm not like a traditionally trained marketer, but I'm more technical in nature because my dad always owned technical businesses. So I was always exposed to tech from a very young age. I started out with my first computer was a TRS-80.
Hey,
And so I
same.
was, wow.
Yep.
Okay. So there we go. I wrote my first basic program
Yep.
on a TRS-80 and ran the program and got an output. And I was like, woo, cool. And
Yep.
we could send that to a printer. And it was cool, right? And I knew I didn't want to be a programmer. I knew that for a fact. I knew that my personality was too outgoing. It was too vivacious. It was too people focused to ever want to just sit down and be a programmer working in a basement somewhere. I knew that, but I knew that I was too technical of a minded person and a too process of a minded person to want to go into marketing. And so I was
Right.
like, I'm in this weird place, but luckily that weird place actually is the perfect place to become like a business analyst or a solution architect or someone that bridges the
Yes.
gap
We're in
between technical
product.
people and business
Right.
people.
Yes.
Exactly. And
Yes.
did you have a similar sort of journey?
100%. Everything you're saying is 100% true. And I didn't realize it until I went to work for this IT startup in the insurance business. And the whole reason that I got picked for this job to run the product organization was because of the fact that I was able to educate myself enough, talk competently with engineers, not to know that they could,
Yes.
right? But I could also educate myself enough to talk competently to our customers and their business users and to stay really constantly curious and inquisitive about why and never stop asking the question why and connecting the dots. And when your job is to basically build something that is effectively you're building it. There's no technical debt necessarily. So you're building to solve the business problems of your customers. If you're building it as single source code SaaS model, which was what we had, what we built had to serve all of our customers' needs and be configurable enough to serve all of our customers' needs. That means that you couldn't fall into the hole of doing what a lot of the way agencies work. And I spent most of my e-commerce time in agencies, which is doing bespoke stuff for individual customers. That makes it easy because they tell you something and you just do the thing that they tell you to do. But when it's a full single code based SaaS model, you can't do that. And now you have switches and forks and configurations, and you have to get it right because there is no way to overwrite it or undo it at the individual account level. And so constantly having to balance, am I hearing pain that is a business need or just pain that is pain? Is this pain that happens once a day, once a month, once a quarter, annually? Like customers, people who run businesses, let's say, Jason, don't think of their business as a system. Very often they think of their business as a series of individual tasks and pain points that they encounter throughout the day. So they're driving their little bumper car around a track, and where they hit a bumper, right, where they hit the side of the track, they're like, ouch, that was a problem. That track shouldn't be there. It's probably there for a reason, but also the point of the experience is not to actually to run into the sides. The point is to not run into the sides. And I think thinking of it as the whole track is one big experience is your business, and not the moment of impact is not your business. And coming in from the outside can often give you a very freeing view of, and you know this of course because of your business model, right? When you're coming in from outside and you can see the whole thing, you can see actually where the self-inflicted pain points are, where the market pressures are, where the internal workforce development pressures are, where the competitive pressures are, all as a single cohesive system. And you can make actionable recommendations to make it better from that perspective. And that's what's useful. And I think if you've got, to your point, the ability to meld the technical knowledge with the business knowledge, you're a lot less likely to be taken for a ride by a fast talking IT salesman, but you're
Yes.
also a lot more likely to actually get value from the technology investments that you're making.
Yeah, that's so accurate. And I remember my first ever agency role, and so we had multiple technologies under one roof. We had our own in-house bespoke built. We didn't even call it SaaS. We didn't even know it was called SaaS at the time, but we had our own CMS platform that was accessible via a web browser that everybody had their own little tenant, their own little version of their CMS on through the web browser. They had an account that they logged into and that they owned, and they could make that customer facing with their own domain name or a subdomain of ours. And then we also had a commerce platform that was functioning exactly the same way. It was a web browser based commerce platform, but it had no automated payments infrastructure behind it. It was all manual. So it would capture credit card data in an unencrypted database, and then we would manually copy those out. I remember at the time, the way that it worked was you would have to manually write those on a line item sheet with your bank that you got you always got your merchant account through your bank, right? So my bank and my business bank account, they would provide your merchant account. And so normally they would provide you a zip-zap machine, right? To run credit cards for cards. And then you would submit all those in a bulk lot in a Ziploc pouch to your bank. The bank's copy of the zip-zap machine, you would submit those to the bank, and then about a week later, all those funds would hit your account on a rolling
We
basis.
call them knuckle busters.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because, oh my God, you'd scrape it across the raised embossed thing.
Yes.
Oh God. And so what they did was, in the early days, they basically just quasi-digitalized that process. And they said, okay, so the bank gave us a phone number to call, an automated phone number. It was with a bot, a voice-activated bot, and it would say, put in you would type in the credit card details, the number, you would type in the expiry date, you would type in the amount, and then it would be either approved or not. And if it was approved, you would get a 4-digit approval number, and you would have this long 50 lines on a sheet where you would have all these transactions manually handwritten in, and then you would submit that single sheet to your bank, and then a week later, the funds would hit your account. So it was a quasi-automated. There was no such thing back then as a fully automated payment gateway. It didn't exist yet in the very, very earliest days of the internet. And I remember thinking, this is ridiculous. I literally remember thinking, this is a joke. Like, why can this not be fully, if they can have a bot that tells you to type in keys and numbers, and I'm thinking, why can't they make this fully automated via the internet? This service is for internet businesses. Why can't they make it automated via the internet? And I remember thinking, this is so damn frustrating, because all of our customers had to do the same thing running the e-commerce platform. And it was a freaking nightmare. If you did 1,000 orders a day, you had a team of 3 or 4 people that their full-time job was ringing the bank and getting approval for each of those transactions.
About B2B payments, Jason. Let's talk about it.
Yes, B2B hasn't advanced too far from that in many cases. And so it's wild that both you and I, as early as we were to this internet game, we were able to see pain points, and it took a long time for the tech to catch up. We were building, as an agency, fully bespoke websites in Flash, right? We were building fully bespoke websites in Flash, or latterly, we were building them in frames. I remember beautiful frames, and the horrible, it sped development, but it broke the whole URL model of the entire internet. And then I remember when OS Commerce came along, that was the game changer for us. We were like, okay, cool. We've actually got a platform that's designed specifically for digital commerce. We do not have to build everything bespoke. And this is something that's repeatable. We can customize the look, the feel, the design, the branding, the colors, but we don't have to build the entire platform from the ground up. And then, of course, latterly, Magento came along and a whole lot of other platforms came along. But just remember thinking, this is not scalable. If we build custom websites for people that are e-commerce enabled, this is totally not scalable. We cannot build a custom e-commerce website, even reusing components. We cannot build a custom e-commerce website for all of our customers. It's totally not scalable. We can do maybe 12 builds a year, max, like one a month, maybe. And I thought, we want to do hundreds. Like, we had hundreds of potential customers, and I was like, this is never going to work unless we build on top of a standardized suite of technology.
That's exactly right.
And at what point do you realize we need to be able to scale?
It's funny because at that insurance, the startup I was talking about, the first version of that business was bespoke quoting systems made for customers. And you could only build so many at a time, and everyone had their own sort of like local instance of it. And it was good because you could get them whatever they wanted, and everybody loved it. To be super clear, the move to a full SaaS model was not being driven by the customers, because customers had what they needed. They had the internet, they had their own business logic, and it worked great. There were no compromises on there, and because they got exactly the system they wanted. And for a lot of businesses, That's totally fine. It's at the platform level that you were like, this, my business won't scale constantly doing this because now I've built a services business. I'm not an IT provider. I'm a services
I'm a
business.
managed services and professional
I'm a
services
general
company.
contractor at this point. The GC model only takes you so far. What everybody does in tech, and especially when interest rates were very low and there was a lot of talent floating around, was everyone wanted to productize, platform, and move to subscription-based SaaS instead of one-time CapEx. I pay it, I have it, it's there, to I pay a little bit over time for access to the platform. I'm leasing access to my platform. And we made the same decision that almost every other company has made, which is to move from being builders to being real estate agents effectively for software that was hosted on our data center, but leased out to customers. And again, the transition of moving from that model, the bespoke model, to the platform model gave me a job because it's a hard thing to do. And so you need basically like a lot of shepherding and sherping to make that possible. Is it a better outcome at the end of the day for the customers? Maybe. Maybe I go back and forth on this topic, honestly, because I've seen both sides of it to some degree. I think it's definitely better for platform companies, regardless of what the platform is, to centralize that. Lets you manage costs better, lets you protect revenue better. It lets you have recurring revenue that matches your overall OpEx better instead of constantly having to be sales driven, where like the only way I get more money is to sell a brand new deal and the long-term tail of the contract is worth nothing to me. 100%. It does great things for software companies moving to this model. I'm still, depending on what side of the bed I wake up on, I'm ambivalent about whether it's a good thing for companies.
Yeah, I think the one thing it did do was to radically bring down the CapEx cost of software for businesses. And so
Very
that's
true.
so I think in that sense, being able to spread that cost over a much longer period of time. And also, I think the other major benefit of moving away from the bespoke model is I, as the buyer of the software, I now benefit from the development that's being done on behalf of hundreds of other businesses, bringing features in that maybe I wouldn't even have thought of on my own. And I remember, like, when I was scoping those early bespoke projects, it was all up to the business owner to tell us what kind of experience they wanted their customers to have with the software. And many times these people are not technical people. And so they're going, I don't know, aren't you the expert? Aren't you supposed to tell me how it's supposed to work? And I think, and I even got that latterly as I worked in the agency space, we would get into discoveries with clients, and like halfway through day one, when 95% of their answers are, I don't know, you're the expert, why don't you tell me how we should do this? I discovered at that point that software really needs a core set of what I'd call table stakes functionality that needs to be there, because these businesses don't want to make granular decisions about every single thing that their business does and the way that it interfaces with the customer.
Up to a point. And I think it's where you see the distinction between the difference between a small company and an enterprise company is not right. It is often the level of maturity that they have around their own, the level of knowledge they have around their own needs is, I think, startling. I've worked with, now I'm drawing specifically on my e-commerce experience, but worked with companies that are basically very small mom and pops, single proprietor, literal small businesses, right? All the way up to massive multi-nat CPGs, billions and billions of revenue. And like the bigger the company, usually the more knowledge there is about what they need. Now that knowledge is often diffused over a large group of people, and it becomes political very quickly. Just get into the conversations around who has the access and the knowledge, and is this person's answer binding on this other division? That's a whole separate conversation. But by and large, there are people like you and me, business analysts, consultants, architects, who at least are paid to think about this from within the side of the business. And those people usually have that knowledge around like what they need and what's table stakes versus what they don't need. You get into the very small companies, I totally agree with you. The benefits of the sort of multi-tenant or the full sort of like subscription model to software is very apparent, because though a very small company will never be able to afford the kind of bespoke software that they may think they need. And so they benefit as almost a free rider on the innovation that's gone from everybody before them, because the provider very rarely makes money on one individual account, right? They make money at scale. And that's the difference in a lot of enterprise software, a lot of approaches. It's why there's so much ATG and SAP on-prem still floating around out there, Jason. They're not thrilled about it, but they're also like hard to get away.
Yeah, software becomes super sticky once it's deeply embedded into every process of your business. It becomes super sticky. So let's fast forward to today, and let's fast forward to past your big commerce experience, which is direct platform experience with the
Mhm.
vendor side of the fence. And now you've been with Oro for a year and a half now, head of product marketing and strategic partnerships, also have your own consultancy, the Bald Commerce Consultancy, executive
Very
consultant.
creative.
So let's talk about when you made the jump from big. How did first of all, did you already know about Oro? Did you already know they existed in the market? Clearly, Orocommerce is massively B2B focused versus, say, Big, which up until recently was totally retail focused and totally focused on D2C and B2C brands. So quite a shift there in terms of their
Mhm.
business model, their target customer avatar, their ICP, all that sort of stuff. So what made you think, okay, cool, I've come from more of a retail background, retail experience, retail platform experience. Yes, in insurance had more of a B2B type of
Mhm.
understanding of the world. But how and when did you decide to make that? I wouldn't necessarily call it a career pivot, but certainly a realigning of focus around what types of customers you felt you could help work with
Yep.
and sort of champion.
Great
And
question.
so, at what point did you make that mental model change?
So, I guess a couple of notes on that. When I first got into e-commerce, I was at an agency. That was my first job, and I was a solutions architect. That was my role. I was brought on to do pre-sales and then post-sales work and consulting. And this was largely inside the Magento ecosystem. So I
Mhm.
spent actually quite a few years as pre-Adobe, right? This was the getting my certifications and doing a lot of deep Magento stuff. What I found true was that a few years, really only 2 or 3 years into my Magento journey, I started noticing a trend. And the trend was that Magento as a platform was extremely competitive in the B2B space and not competitive in the B2C space. The set to my point, right? The new Shopify, Big Commerce, Miva, like there were a bunch of them out there that SaaS platforms had figured out over several years how to build a consumer grade e-commerce platform and get it deployed much faster and much quicker with much less overhead for what you and I might consider simpler use cases, right? One customer buying on behalf of themselves from a limited SKU, limited catalog of maybe a few hundred to a few thousand products, right? With payment integrations built in for major gateways and providers and things like shipping calculation through companies like Shipper HQ or web shop apps, companies like Avalara and
Mhm.
Vertex out there
The
doing price
tax.
calculation. Yeah, exactly. There was a lot of that stuff had commodified and turned into point solutions that could be really just orchestrated by the e-commerce platform for a normal B2C or D2C customer model. And Magento, this big, heavy, complicated thing, what we sold all the time with Magento was you can do anything with this.
Yes.
But increasingly, what happened with the conversations were like, people were like, I don't need it to actually do everything. I needed to do these 15 things. And this super cheap SaaS platform actually does those 15 things. So thank you very much. We'll see you later. Right. People with complicated business models still needed Magento because SaaS never got up to being able to handle like complicated CPQ or
Oh, yeah.
configurations or and then B2B. Because in B2B, as you very much well know, there's not a lot of standardization across the board in terms of what people are selling, how they're selling it, what they need from their platform. The line between ERP, CRM, and e-commerce and PIM is very muddy
Yes.
inside of a
Very
lot of
blurry.
manufacturing and distribution. And so what people needed from their e-commerce platform was like, hey, I need technology. I need technology that I can adapt and mold into serving my specific cases because I run a $30 million business on the back of FileMaker Pro, and we have a WordPress site. And no one can figure out how to actually figure out how much products cost without a phone call and an internal meeting.
Yep.
So what I really kept running into was digitization of sales and operations, and the e-commerce platform was really just a convenient label for an IT transformation project that grew hair immediately. And so Magento was, of course, perfect for that in a lot of ways because it's open source, right? You single tenant, like you can do whatever you want to with it.
Yeah.
Um,
The downside is you can do everything whatever you want with it.
that's exactly right. And quite a few companies would get themselves into technical debt and technical holes because Magento was not out of the box tuned for what they needed. So as engineers, it was like, great, I at least have the tools to build it, right?
Yes.
But what you would end up delivering more often than not often looked more like custom software. right?
Totally.
It really looked more like a
100%.
custom platform than anything
100%.
else. But it got the job done. And at the time, you had Hybris had been bought by SAP and was massively expensive.
ATG was massively expensive.
ATG was massively expensive. And in the B2B software realm, there really weren't a lot of
There was
established
Sterling,
players.
massively expensive, massively complex. So
Mm-hmm.
there was very few options that weren't
So
massively
Magento
complex.
took off. And
Yeah.
on the agency side, to answer your question in a very long-winded way, what I ended up doing was I became a consultant to these companies to try to understand, okay, here's how your business operates. Here's what I know the technology can do. How do I steer basically here's your budget number that you're trying to stay within.
Yes.
How do I build and design a solution for you that works for your business that stays inside your budget? And I was doing that again and again for manufacturing and distribution and less for retail. And when I finally got out of the Adobe Commerce Magento business back in 2021, 2022, I went to BigCommerce. Part of that was me realizing that the thing that Adobe was building at this point, the direction they were taking the product, was they were steering it away from the thing that they were actually having commercial success with, in my opinion. I felt it was not the right, I felt like long term, my skills and background were becoming less relevant, I think. And so I wanted to go to work. I wanted to go back to my roots and go back to my product company roots and say, hey, how do we build something that's actually solves these complicated problems at scale that doesn't require, where there's alignment on what the intent is? And I don't want to dwell on it, but I was asked to leave, right, with a large group of other people at BigCommerce. BigCommerce does at least annual reductions in force. And I was, after 2 years, caught up in one of those things. And what I wanted to do is I knew two things. I knew I wanted to stay on the platform side. It's just been 8 years doing agency work. Like I really wanted to invest in building something tangible.
Yes.
And I also wanted it to be in the B2B space because I felt like Shopify was doing such a really amazing job of commodifying and delivering experiences on the B2C side. And I spent a little time in the Salesforce Commerce Cloud world, and I was getting into that platform. And I'm like, oh my, it was incredibly expensive for the type of stuff that you could deliver for like sometimes a tenth of the cost with Shopify. And I like, this doesn't seem tenable. Adobe doesn't seem tenable. Like B2B is the last place to go for people like me,
people like us
who like solving complex business problems through technology and not just having everything be yet another SaaS license, right? Where it's, what's my stack? My stack is 20 apps. Like that's what it starts looking like in the B2C world, is your solutioning starts looking like just a recommendations engine for apps and third parties, but actually getting to build something sustainable that's going to solve a big company for a long period of time and drive value. That's what led me to Oro. You'd asked if I'd ever heard of Oro. Ironically, yes, because my very first e-commerce agency was also an Oro partner in the very early days of Oro when it was just a CRM. And
Yes.
so, and because the original founders of Magento, there was a relationship, I got to know some of those people back in 2013, 2014. And
Yeah.
it's funny that I'm here working for them now. To me, it's funny to me.
Yeah, we had a very similar journey, I think. I remember two things. First of all, I think I may have been the third person in the world that got a Oro CRM demo from Yoav himself. That's the first thing, when it was still in beta. And when it was still in beta, because I also was working in the Magento ecosystem at that time. I was working for a Magento Gold Partner agency. I had become Solution Specialist certified, and I was one of the first in the world to get that, because as a non-developer, they were one of the first platforms in the world where you could get some form of a certification that signified your capability with the platform outside of a development certification. And so I was like, I put my hand up as being one of the first guys. I know this platform inside and out as an architect. Now I need to prove it by going and getting Solution Specialist certified. And I remember thinking, so we were only a Magento agency to start off with. Then we took on BigCommerce as a platform that we wanted to build a practice around. I remember the first BigCommerce project we ever did at the time. It was a B2C project. And I remember our developer said, okay, you go and you try to configure everything you can configure in the platform, and we'll do everything else.
Boy,
We'll
did
do
we
all the
have a similar
customization with everything
experience. I love this. Yep.
And I remember I was able to set up almost every single configuration for this client in a day, in 6 hours of configuration in the back end of BigCommerce. Had never been trained on it, just worked my way through every single tab, every single sub-tab, every single function of the platform, worked it out for myself, figured it out. And I remember thinking, at the end of that day, I thought, what the hell do customers need us for? And now, obviously, we figured that out, and we thought, okay, we're going to have to focus much more heavily on UI UX, custom theme design, system integration,
ERP integrations.
Yes, exactly. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, it was my first taste of real proper SaaS, like modern SaaS platforms, because I hadn't played with Shopify yet. And I remember thinking, this changes everything forever. Magento, where you had to have a PhD in Magento to even do configuration in the back end of Magento and understand how multi-site, multi-domain, multi-storefront, how all that architected together and what level of multi-store you needed to build. So it was like an epiphany hit me. But like you, the thing that I always remembered was the projects that were the most technical, the most interesting, the ones that required the most complex system integrations, the ones that required the most consulting by someone like me were the B2B projects, not the B2C and D2C projects, which were mostly, not entirely, but mostly design led, meaning that form over function was the biggest priority in the B2C projects, whereas function over form was the biggest priority in all the B2B projects I was associated with. And so I felt like with my skill set, my experience, and my background, B2B felt like a much more natural, better fit for someone like me than doubling and tripling down on the B2C and D2C world. And so it took me a long time to go full B2B with the starting of my own consultancy. But even for the duration of time that I worked inside brands and agencies, always the most interesting projects were the B2B projects. And I thought, okay, there's very few of us out there that have really much experience in the B2B world at all. There's not too many consultants out there that focus on the B2B world exclusively. There's very few agencies out there that focus on the B2B world exclusively. And there's very few platform vendors out there that focus on the B2B world exclusively. And I thought, wow, okay, if you talk about skating where the puck is going, I felt, okay, B2B feels like a great fit. And it feels like you came to the same
Exactly. Because for me, it's a continuation of the insurance days for me. It's if
Yes.
you think back to how I was describing that, it's a lot of the same conversations, and I love them. And
Yes.
so Oro was built specifically to be the B2B version of Magento in a lot of respects. And so
Yes.
it's that focus on the features that we develop. Do all of my customers use all of my features? No, but what you find, we have a very high renewal rate.
Yes.
We have good longevity and retention. One of the things that I love, I chair our customer advisory board. We just had an in-person meeting in Los Angeles a couple months ago. And again, to talk to people is great. Like in-person meetings are back, man. It's
Oh,
fantastic.
I love it. I freaking love it.
But one of the things that's really great about that is there was a quote from one of our customers, and one of our larger customers, and it's a major, very large sort of enterprise HVAC manufacturer and distributor. And she said, whenever we launch something, whenever we do something, the question isn't why use Oro, it's why not? And we've never found a reason not to, because sales operations, quoting, websites, normal e-commerce, CRM stuff, like they use all of it.
Marketplace.
Like they've been on Oro for so long now that they are making use of every single piece of the platform. A lot of my customers come in and they start here. Their vision of what e-commerce is here. But as time goes on, when you have this big asset that can do build your own workflows, build your own integrations, build your own processes,
AI sales agent,
AI built into it for free. We have inbox integration there's a lot of stuff that you can do. Oh, wait, someone will have an idea, not even thinking about e-commerce specifically. And there's a whole separate question about what is e-commerce, right? In B2B,
Totally.
We talked about this earlier, and then we have actually a system. We have we have an ERP in the back end, and then we've got this big thing called Oro that is the front end of the ERP that is way more flexible and requires a lot less political arm twisting to make changes to than the ERP does, because touching the ERP is a fraught thing to do for a lot of companies. But you can do whatever you want to with Oro. And so over time, more and more of the features and functionality, if you look at the things that we've added over time, they're based pretty explicitly on conversations we're having with real operators in the field, manufacturing and distribution, bringing a business problem. And we never... we're in our roadmap conversations, right, internally, when it's Yoav and Dima and Itai and people, right, that we're all meeting. No one ever says, well, that's not e-commerce, we're not going to do it. We're not a X. That's not our job. That you don't hear that sentence here internally. You don't hear anybody, that's not our job. That's not our domain. No, that's a problem. Can we solve it? Now, we don't say yes to everything, but the answer never comes from drawing a very well-defined box around like what kind of solutions we provide, and then casting some things into the outer darkness and just focusing on a handful of, we're a shopping cart. Sorry, guys, we're a shopping cart. I can remember having conversations with some of the product folks at Adobe One of the things that's always bugged me about Magento and Adobe is that a customer is someone who registers for an account and creates a username and password. It's not someone who buys from you. A customer record does not get created every time I capture. I can get their bill to, their ship to, their purchase history, but until they create a password, I don't get any kind of permanent data. It's just transactional
Wow.
order data. That's all. And I remember going to the product people at Magento, hey guys, we're doing a lot of B2B. What would be really great is if when somebody bought something, the system remembered that somebody was a person and could create a
Yes.
record that I could sync and add to. The answer I always got was like, we're not a CRM. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, but this would not be hard for you to do necessarily. And like the market would like for you to do it because a lot of my customers don't have CRMs.
Yes. Yeah.
We try very hard not to be that way here.
Yeah. I love that. I absolutely love that. What's next for Aaron? What's next for Oro? What's next? Obviously, I like just speaking for me personally, I have found a new sense, not that I ever lost my sense, but I found a new sense of wonder. I found a new sense to get up every day. I found a new sense of excitement and fervor for the industry now that agentic AI, GEO, all these things to do with AI, full stop, all the quantum impacts these are having and will continue to have on commerce, full stop,
Yep.
is so exciting. It reminds me of the excitement back in the mobile days. That's the nearest thing that I can compare it to, is the excitement that I felt back when I held the first Apple iPhone 3G in my hand and I went, this changes everything forever in our industry. And that holding the iPhone in my hand for the first time, it wasn't even mine, it was my friend's because he was rich and I wasn't. And he could afford an iPhone and I couldn't. I remember the same feeling I had when I first got online with dial-up and remember thinking, oh my God, this changes everything forever. This opens up a whole new world for us. I remember feeling the exact same feeling in the pit of my stomach when I held the iPhone in my hand for the very first time. And I'm getting the exact same feeling about AI and commerce today that I had back in those two instances.
Feel
And
the
I'm
exact same
so
way.
excited.
I feel the exact same way. And you'll see it in our roadmap. Obviously, we've released already this year 2 big AI capabilities and really the one that I think is getting the most people interested is our AI Smart Order, which is basically taking PDF and email sales orders that are emailed to a rep and automatically digitizing them into and error checking them for, do I have this SKU? Is that SKU available for that person? Do we have that
Completeness. Do
quantity?
I have all the
Is that
information I
ship
need to
due there?
actually
Do I
get
have
the order into the OMS and
are
all
these
that?
terms and being able to build an automated workflow around, what used to be I'm swiveling from one system. I've got Outlook over here and I've got my ERP over here and I'm 10 keying all of this in. And if I fat figure something, oops, because the ERP will let you do anything because that's ERPs. Using AI as a free included feature with Oro. And this is our strategy is we're trying to find the interactions where it makes sense to insert some agentic AI or GEO or good old fashioned algorithms and ML. And can we automate something or speed something up or improve the quality of a process that is taking time away from actual value creation inside the company? And what we're doing is Salesforce, they've got a different sort of approach to AI and how they're selling it and positioning it. We have one
Yes.
product, it's called Orocommerce. The AI that we have in our product is included in the product. We're not selling extra AI, little bot licenses or agent licenses or charging per query or anything like that. It's included. And so we've got the storefront down. We've got some of the back office. I think what you're going to see from a roadmap perspective is more AI into our back office to make our operators' lives better, basically, make our customers, employees' lives better and faster. And through that, deliver a better customer experience to their customers. And that is what our job is as technologists, is to take the raw material of technology and shape it into something that adds actual business value for an end customer and an end user. And that should get cheaper and more accessible over time, not more expensive over time. And that's why we're not charging extra.
I love it. I love it. Listen, it's been a fantastic conversation. Hours absolutely ripped by, as I knew it would. I knew that this would happen, that we could talk for hours on end about almost anything. Now, I will drop a link to your LinkedIn profile and, of course, to the Oro website in the show notes. But other than that, if people want to reach out to you and chew the fat about commerce and whether they're B2B or not, and they want to just open up a dialogue with you and shake the tree, so to speak, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
LinkedIn is the best way to get a hold of me. I check my DMs pretty regularly, so slide in there if you've got a question or a comment, and happy to chat.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for your time, Aaron. Now, as we finish off and we round off, I like to finish off by handing the microphone over to my guest. Let them ask me one question, any question they like. It can be personal or professional. So, Mr. Aaron Sheehan from Oro, what is your question for me today?
I know that you and your wife have just moved all the way to Mexico. You've been there a little over a year now. Is that right?
2.5, almost 3 years now, living in Mexico.
Wow.
Yeah, we came.
Time
We moved
flew
to
by.
Mexico in February of 2023. Spent all of 2023 traveling around the country, exploring and seeing where
Got
we
it.
wanted to live. And then August of last year, we bought our house in Puebla.
Perfect. So my question for you is, what is the best Mexican food? What is your favorite dish? I'm not looking for a restaurant recommendation. I'm looking for a dish. What is something that you guys really like?
Look, I love Mexican food, full stop. So it's hard to pick a favorite. My wife's favorite, and what is fast becoming one of my absolute favorites, is mole. And one of the
Mhm.
reasons why it's one of my favorites is because it actually originates from Puebla. So the full name of it is mole poblano. So it actually
Mhm.
is a cuisine of Puebla. It originates from Puebla. It's now available kind of throughout the whole of Mexico, but it's effectively a chocolate-based savory dish that is effectively almost like a salsa, but it's more of a creamy, buttery, savory, spicy kind of a. It's almost like an enchilada sauce, but it's its own unique beast. And it can be served over just shredded meat. It can be served over an enchilada. It can be served in many different ways. But I absolutely love mole, and it's my wife's. She doesn't like just generally Mexican food as much as I do, but mole is one of her absolute favorite dishes. And so luckily we live in Puebla where it's available absolutely everywhere. So feel very fortunate to live in Puebla is also known as one of the cuisine capitals of Mexico, along with Oaxaca and a few other places.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, we feel very fortunate to live in a place where the heart of Mexican cuisine, a lot of it originates from here.
It sounds amazingly delicious. I love a good mole. So good answer. And I suspect that what you get there is better than what is accessible to me in Missouri. So maybe I'll come visit.
I would hope so. So you need to come. You need to stay at our house, 3-bedroom house, spare bedroom. It's all yours. We've got a rooftop terrace out here overlooking the city of Puebla with a barbecue on the terrace. Come and visit me. First round of margaritas is on me, my friend. Thank you so much for
Fantastic.
your time. I really appreciate it. And I can't wait to speak to you again soon.
Thank you, Jason. Had a blast.
Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.